The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel will again be answering questions from our listeners. Let's start off with Michelle, who lives in Hoboken, New Jersey. And Michelle says, recently, former President Trump said that the greatest threat to our democracy is the enemy from within. What does this really mean? Mark, Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it means that the enemy is with him, but it's not the enemy that he thinks it is, in my opinion.
Exactly. Anybody that disagrees with him. I would say that's that's what he says, the enemy within. We've heard this so many times from, people that want to be autocrats and such. Any dissension. We've heard that Trump wants to take away CBS's license, FCC license, and he wants to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air and all this other stuff. So yeah, I would say his concept of the enemy from within would be anybody with any kind of disagreement with his positions.
And I think that for anybody who's undecided out there listening to us, or anybody who is a Republican that would ordinarily lean Trump but is not real sure, a couple of interesting things have just happened as far as his transition team is concerned. There was a leak, and one of the possibilities is that Aileen Cannon, the federal judge who was in charge of his classified documents case down in Florida, is being floated as a possible candidate for Attorney General. And another potential candidate for Attorney General is Jeffrey Clark, who's been indicted in Georgia for being real eager in the last aftermath of the election to overturn the election and was willing to go along with what Trump wanted him to do, even as some of the others in the DOJ were saying that there would be a massive amount of people resigning and basically stopping Trump from doing what it was that he wanted to do, which consisted of basically just say the election was fraudulent and leave it to me and the Republicans in Congress. Some of the other people who have been floated are Mike Davis, who's social media guy who talks about imprisoning members of the media in gulags and putting migrant children in cages and targeting Trump's political opponents. And this is sort of the caliber of people that I think you're going to see in a second Trump administration. And Ezra Klein in the New York Times had a great article this week about the difference between the guardrails that were put up by the people around Trump in the first administration. He didn't quite know how to do what he wanted to do, and the people that he's going to have in there now. And the difference is very, very stark. And that these people are nothing but yes men who are going to allow him to do whatever crazy stuff he wants to do. If he wants to nuke a hurricane, somebody's going to go, you got it, boss. We'll nuke a hurricane. And it's not going to stop there. Some of the other things that he wanted to do was bomb Mexico and then just deny that we were the ones who did it, which was like a fairly insane idea for those who are unfamiliar with that concept. and that Ezra Klein, one of the things that Ezra Klein in his article really sounded a lot like Plato in the Republic.
Yeah.
And, Plato wrote, he suspects certain men of having free thoughts and not putting up with his ruling. Some of those who helped in setting him up and are in power, the manliest among them, speak frankly to him and to one another, criticizing what is happening. And then the tyrant must gradually do away with all of them if he's going to rule until he has neither friend nor enemy of any worth whatsoever. That's Trump too.
Yep.
Plato's tyrant is Trump 2.0. I have faith in the American people. I guess we're going to talk about that in a minute or two, but that they're going to reject this horrific human being.
All I can say is that if Trump gets in and there is the enemy within, take a page out of Russia. Don't go near a window, because that's how Putin gets rid of his opponents. They somehow miraculously fall out of windows. They get poisoned. All the assassinations that happen there. And this is, as Scott said, it is. And if you read Plato, anybody that really does, if you can get through it, this is the design. And anyone with any classical education would see it in like a heartbeat. You'd also see it in books such as Mein Kampf. There are parallels in Mein Kampf, but if we want to look to a more recent example, I would say look to Russia and all those people miraculously falling out of windows in places where you don't expect windows to actually be. And, the investigations.
But also dying in prison, right?
Dying in
Navalny,
prison, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of ways that this can manifest itself, but none of it's any good. And I think the thing that gets me is that those that support Trump believe that they're immune from it. They're going after the liberals. They're going after this. They're going after that. But if Trump has never shown anything, it's always been, what have you done for me today? And if the answer is nothing, well, you're on the chopping block as much as anybody else. I think it was very important that John Kelly came out, General Kelly, former chief of staff, and said he's a fascist. Now, I would agree with, and very rarely do I agree with John Bolton, but let's not argue over what an actual fascist is as far as the makeup of what a fascist would be, because one of the things of a fascist is that they have an idea. Trump does not have an idea. He is strictly transactional, and it's all about him. And that's all there is to it. So for those undecided voters, I honestly cannot figure out this undecided thing. How can you be undecided? How can you possibly be undecided?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard from our point of view because we're so immersed in this stuff all the time and
Right.
long have been. But I imagine that there was probably a time in my life when I was younger and I just didn't follow politics at all, and I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't really care that much because the government didn't have much impact on my life. Back in those days, my only issue was keep me out of war and keep me out of the military long enough for me to avoid the war. And I can't honestly think of anything else I really cared about that would have been affected by politics. So that's who I'm guessing the undecided are. People with their heads down, nose to the grindstone, who are so busy making a living and just trying to survive that they haven't really given this all that much thought. But for those people to think for a second that Donald Trump is anything like him just because he goes behind a fryer at McDonald's is the height of stupidity. I'm sorry to say. He is the elite of the elite, and everything else is just an act.
Yeah. And even being an elite is an act. Robert Reich was on, they did a study on Trump's wealth. If Trump had not invested in what he did, but like just did a mutual fund or whatever, he would be richer today than he is. If he had just put it into a hedge fund or something, he would be far richer today. And he had a great statement. He goes, the best way to get a little bit of wealth is to start with a lot of wealth. And that is exactly what Donald Trump has done. And if you think he's a great businessman, I still to this day cannot figure out how you bankrupt a casino. That takes a skill, not a skill you'd want to have, but that takes a skill to take a casino, which can do nothing but make money, and bankrupt it. So good luck with that.
Unless there's a follow-up, I think we're done there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had just wanted to add that Trump had also talked about pulling ABC's license as well as CBS's, and that Democratic strategist James Carville said, and James Carville is about 82 now, and he said that he said that he fully expects to be put in prison if Trump wins. So as Mark and Scott have both said, the enemy within is an American citizen who disagrees with anything that Trump says, has not voted Republican, does not support every single thing that Trump wants to do.
Well said. Well said.
Absolutely. Yep. And I would say that we are the enemy from within in his mind.
And that would include the three of us. Yes. So thank you, Michelle, for the question. I will see you all next time.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.